Every once in a while, I like to take a look into the top virtual tables online and see what's kind of floating around as some new secret sauce that no one's really discovered yet. And I came across a very interesting list from a very high ranked player, and they were playing against Red Blue. And the list that you're seeing on screen here is my best attempt at reconstructing what they were playing. It is very unique. And I honestly thought I was watching a player trying to make a deck from like set 2 work because I was seeing things like Maleficent Sorceress, Cusco, Minnie Mouse Stylish Surfer. But then I started to see things like Genie and I was like, okay, so it's a little bit modernized, but like what was going on here? This list, what I saw it do to Red Blue was very interesting, and arguably Red Blue would be a bad matchup for this deck. And where this deck would seemingly shine after taking some time to analyze it is against the Steel decks like Sapphire Steel, because things like Genie, Minnie Mouse, Tinkerbell, even though they're very low on strength, which means they get kind of blown out by the Ruby cards, they're actually quite resilient into the Steel cards, mainly because of their ability to survive a Let the Storm Rage On interaction. Right, you basically need Zeus or a beefed up strength with 3 or more characters in order to deal with these kind of cards. You'll notice something very unique about this list, and I also picked up on this very quickly. There are no Madam Mims, there are no Merlins, rabbits that is, there's goats obviously, and there's only 4 2-drops. I didn't see another 2-drop other than Cusco, and maybe I constructed this wrong, but from what the cards that I saw being played and what I expected to be their ratios, I came very close to 60, and this is the list that we ended up putting together. So the way that I would categorize this deck after seeing it being played is basically a war of attrition deck. You are grinding out draws, out advantaging your opponent to the nth degree, to the extreme degree, right? We saw Ed do this in the North American Championships against Red Blue with cycling rabbits and utilizing Tremaines. Well, this deck takes that concept a little bit further in going back to some of the more efficient draw cards that are less expensive, like the Cusco's, obviously the 1-drop package, and even Maleficent Sorceress. And you might be thinking, Quantum, what the hell is this? Why are you playing these kind of cards? Like this card, just like you play it, it replaces itself, and then it just instantly dies, right? Like what is the point? And I was thinking that too. I was seeing these cards, and I'm like, there's no way this guy queued up with this deck, right? Like this has got to be a mistake. But the deck actually cooked, and it cooked hard. It outgrinded the Red Blue, and like I said, I imagine it would outgrind other Steel decks, mainly the other Sapphire decks in the metagame. Where this deck I could see having, where I can see this deck having trouble is against obviously discard decks, because your draw engines just lose out to Diablo if you're not playing some of the removal options, which as you can see, aside from Minnie Mouse with Crab, there's no other real, or Tinkerbell, or Genie, there's no real out like character-wise to the opposing Diablos. But to be fair, I guess this is a decent package to combat the opposing Diablos in the discard deck. And then if you can outdraw the discard and not play into a Diablo, I think you might actually have a decent chance. But if you remember back from the previous metas where like the locations played a big role in beating discard, I think that was before Diablo though. You can kind of utilize that same strategy here because, like I said, this deck is a war of attrition deck. You're outgrinding your opponent. You're poking them with little characters. Your only instant lore gain is Goat. No Honey Marin, no White Rose, nothing else like that. And you're forcing your opponent to play reactive. You have 2 Dragonfires in the deck to deal with spot removal threats. So let's say a big Tamatoa comes down, or a 6 Tamatoa, or a Sisu that's going to threaten an early quest because they ramped or shifted, and you just want to Dragonfire that threat off the board. What's funny is, if you've ever played the red-purple versus the red-blue matchup, the red-blue matchup tends to ramp very quickly and get to a higher ink count, let's say 7, 8, 9, kind of quickly. But then they kind of lose steam, right? And you see this kind of happen with Sapphire Coil, where you start getting to that end game and they don't have as many cards to ink to trigger the Sapphire Coil over and over again because they've already kind of reached their critical mass. And they're still only playing 1 interaction in a turn. This deck leverages these. I cut down on a 4th Queen's Castle because, again, I didn't want to go too much more over 61. I was already pushing it with 61. But what I would see this guy do, basically, is just, like I said, throw out a bunch of these cards that replace themselves. And all of these cards, when they're paired with locations, just threaten extra draw. So you were constantly outdrawing your opponent, whether you got them to the locations or not. And then from there, when your opponent would either be prepared or you would be prepared and you would replace these cards. You follow up with locations. And this guy in this red-blue matchup, he was playing against like Grammatala Mauis that would instantly out his locations. Anytime he would throw down a Minnie Mouse or a Tinkerbell, it would get like Sea-Suit or Brawled or something like that, or Medusa. So all of his stuff was constantly getting removed. And I'm like, yeah, dude, like, what are you doing? Like, this deck doesn't seem very good. But I would always notice he always had more cards in hand than his opponent. And when his opponent eventually overextended enough, put enough characters on board, usually 3-4 characters, and he had a hand because his cards kept replacing themselves, he would then drop Be Prepared. So you're basically in a war of attrition, outdrawing your opponent, letting them remove your stuff, thinking that, yeah, I'm removing your threats and I'm developing my board. And then you just reset with Be Prepared, right? And then if you follow up that Be Prepared with Queen's Castle or the library, it's very tough for the Sapphire decks to deal with it. And why is that important? Because like I was saying earlier, if you actually pay attention in the red-purple versus like red-blue or Sapphire-Steel matchup, especially the no-wheel versions of Sapphire-Steel, which is basically what they're playing now, they run out of steam very quickly and they stop inking, whereas you will have tons of cards and you continue to ink. And so what actually ended up happening is these matches went to turn like 15, 16, and the red-purple player had like 12 or 13 ink, and they were like, be prepared, play Queen's Castle in the same turn. And then like the red-blue player was like, okay, drop a Maui and deal 7 damage, and then, you know, follow up with a Dragon Fire, and then your location just outgrinded and you know, yeah, outgrinded your opponent on the Sapphire deck. Yes, against the Steel decks, you still have to worry about something like a Pete coming down, but they don't cycle Pete. Against Purple Steel, I could see where you would have some trouble, but like I said, into the Steel matchups, these cards can be a little tough to remove. And maybe you should be playing more of these, but I couldn't find a way to fit them in. I did see a Tinkerbell and I did see a Minnie Mouse in the matchups, in the games that I saw from this player. So I know that they're definitely on these cards. Why they're not on 4 of one and or the other, I don't know. Like, this is a hero, this is an ally. I don't know if that really matters for any kind of like removal stuff, but I just split 2 and 2 just to be safe. But these evasive threats, you know, if they go unchecked, even for one turn, they do a lot of damage, right? Just turning them sideways once, you know, these cards being so cost efficient too, like you put them on a location, especially the library. Now you don't really care if they get banished. Like, these cards instantly replace themselves, and you're just constantly dropping threats. The one of Finders Keepers, I saw him play this in both the matches, and I don't know if it's a one of. I only saw one in each match, but like, when you know you have advantage and you're just building up more advantage, you know, when your opponent only has a board that's questing for like 2, you're gonna be like, sure, I'll take a turn off and draw 3 cards, right? Hard casting Friends was constant. Like, I don't think I ever saw the person sing Friends once, but they hard casted Friends at least 4 times across 2 matches. And that would make sense, right? Because the only thing you'd really want to sing Friends with is probably Maleficent. And even then, I remember he had a Maleficent on board and he still opted to quest with it and then hard cast Friends. So like, this deck was insane when I saw it actually in action. Like, I'm not kidding, guys. Like, everything this player was playing was getting removed constantly. But eventually, the red-blue player ran out of cards, and this player still had 5 cards in hand, plus a location on the board. And his locations would get, like, Cusco, too, and Maui, Grammatolid, like I said, and like, instantly outed. And he just always had follow-up. And it was just like, I can't believe it. Like, no matter what you play, you don't even care, because you're just outgrinding your opponent. And like I said, into the Steel matchups, yeah, this deck can, I guess, do the same thing. Where I think it may run into an issue, right, because obviously into the Steel matchups, you're trying to race them over a Lucky Dime, is like, if they get like Maurice's Workshop up, they probably can keep up with your card draw. I guess the issue there is, like, Sapphire Steel doesn't have a way to deal with a wide board, and so what does a deck like this do? Like, look at its curve, right? It literally caps out at 4, because 5 is your Maui and your Dragon Fires, which is your removal options, and 7 is your Be Prepared. So you have the option to clear boards, but your opponent doesn't. So if you go wide enough, right, you're forcing out the song removal from your opponent. How are they ever going to have time to develop a board when they're like, how do I deal with this Minnie Mouse? How do I deal with this Genie? Right? You can still board clear to a certain extent because, again, Brawls, Dragonfire, Maui, Be Prepared. And you keep your opponent off of the threats, right? They have to Zeus your Genies. They have to Strength away your Minnie Mouse's Tinkerbell or Double Storm. You probably can outrace them. Now, I didn't see a Sapphire Steel match. I was hoping to catch more from this player, but I couldn't find their name again. But yeah, this deck was really, really crazy. So I'm gonna hop into a simulation and show you guys kind of how this deck would play against a red blue and against a sapphire steel, because this could be a really decent anti-meta option. So yeah, let's go ahead and take a look at a match. So again, this is just showcasing some concepts. We're going to be going up against red blue. This is the CCS winning 13k list, and the setting on ink table is set to control. And we'll show a sapphire steel later on as well. Again, you can check the timestamps in the video for that. The opponent here goes first, inks and passes, so no turn one item. And I'm thinking about what to do here. The mulligan with this deck is also pretty easy to determine because you just basically want a lot of the low drop cards, which again, with your curve only basically maxing out at 4 and then your removal coming into 5 with Dragonfires and Mauis, and the deck being very ink friendly, it's fairly easy to play. The Kuzco, surprisingly enough, is less efficient than the 1-drops, right? Because it is a 1/2. It does have the same effect as Diablo, but Chernobog and the Magic Broom just have, basically the same stats or better stats in Chernobog's case, and they do replace themselves. Obviously, they are more susceptible to being outed before you draw. In this instance here, you can see this is exactly what was happening during the matchup that I was watching at the high level table, where the red-blue player had to just use their removal on the, basically, I don't want to call them burn cards, but these 1-questers that replace themselves. And you're using high cost removal for these cards, and it doesn't feel great because they replace themselves. And then, like I said, once the board goes wide enough, you just wipe it out with like a Be Prepared. You have crabs, you have Dragonfires to deal with intermediate threats until you need to be prepared. So it's a pretty resilient deck, surprisingly enough. The quest and then the challenge with the Sisu here gets me the draw off the Diablo. We're at 4, the opponent's at 1, and we went second, right? We draw a genie here. This is honestly a bit of a misplay, probably. I probably shouldn't have even bothered with the crab. I was probably better off developing like the Maleficent and a broom. As you can see there, I drew into the friends, or just play the genie. I guess my thinking here was, they're on a lot of ink. I don't want to just develop my board more and have them shift Sisu and just lose my board just yet before I have the Be Prepared. I do have the Dragonfire, right, if they do have a Sisu and they are on a lot of ink, but it's not necessarily the end of the world since they didn't get a lot of questing off early on, so I should be okay. So here, again, not something that I saw the other player do at all in singing friends. They would always hard cast it. But here I figured, crab isn't really doing anything else at the moment. I have no bounce for the crab, so it's really only crash or nothing. So if they want to crash the Grammatala into the crab, that's fine. I play the Minnie Mouse here to try to bait out the removal, and I banish the broom because I don't want it to get traded out by the Grammatala if they opt not to attack the crab. I put down a library and put them on either Maui or Sisu me, right? Wipe my board with the Sisu because my crab is exerted. My Minnie Mouse would die. Or I guess they could Maui and small Sisu again, or Maui Brawl. But they have Maui Shark, and that's not great. So here we're going to Dragonfire, the intermediate threat, because we don't want to Be Prepared this board just yet. Our crab and Minnie Mouse have work to put in here. And we're going to move the crab to the library. And again, you can argue that this is a bit of a misplay. I guess I was just putting the opponent on, I don't want you to shift Sisu. So I end up challenging with the Minnie Mouse instead of going to 9. And then I still go wide enough, threatening or putting myself vulnerable to a hard casted Sisu 8. But the opponent has Medusa, so they end up taking out my Minnie Mouse anyways. And their board is getting a little wide, but we are getting the passive lore from the library there. And again, yeah, you can argue that I should have put Minnie Mouse because it was the bigger threat. It would have had the targets on its back into the library. Again, I'm just kind of playing this deck for the first time, so I'm learning these things, watching my footage back, trying to make changes on the fly as I go. I put out the genie. Now this is definitely, threatening to the opponent. So they're going to need to board wipe me here, Be Prepared, and or Big Sisu. And I think Hector's deck was on 2 Be Prepared, the CCS 13k winning list, and 4 Big Sisus, or 3 or 4 Big Sisus, I don't remember. But yeah, they're going to opt to take out my crab, and then again, ink, reduce down the genie, take it out with the small Sisu, wipe my board out completely, right with the final challenge there, and heal up the Medusa. And, at this point, look at the cards in hand, and the board is about to get wiped, and I still have a location up. So again, just a simulation, but this is literally what was happening in the match that I watched. And this is just how this deck can grind out this matchup to like a great advantage. Now, the CPU gets a really good top deck there in the Tamatoa, and they can actually pop this Vitalisphere to just throw some damage into the library there, because why not? Just get an extra turn off the board and having to wait to challenge it. We go to 12, we draw, we have this Chernobog, and again, we have the answer, right? We have Be Prepared, we have Dragonfires, and we have Mauis in the deck, not that we had one in hand, but to deal with the Tamatoa Crab. There's no sense in banishing there, because again, the opponent has an empty board. Just move everything over to the library. If the opponent top decks removal, sure, but we're not too worried. They pay 2 for a Visions. Yeah, if they don't find the Sisu there with the ink, they can't play the Visions and the Sisu. And then now it's just draw 4 if I want. We're at 14 lore. I'm going to go to 16. I'm going to banish for the double draw here, because yeah, I have so many cards in the deck that replace themselves anyways. Like, I can just afford to banish these Chernobogs. And like I was saying, like, you can see the ink count for all the ramping the opponent did, right? We have more cards and we're still keeping up with ink, right? Not that we really need to. So I just go for the double location to close out the game there, and that is going to be the matchup against red blue. Pretty straightforward, but yeah, showing what the deck can really do. Let's go take a look at Sapphire now, or Sapphire Steel. Okay, so with the Sapphire Steel matchup here, again, we're going to mulligan away the high cost cards and look for inkables and low cost cards. We have a ton of 1-drops and 2-drops in hand. We're going to go ahead, ink the Maui, and play out, since the opponent didn't play the item on turn 1. I think this was the aggro. Yeah, it's the aggro Sapphire Steel deck when they go first, to see what this deck can do. And this is where things like the crabs and the brawls really come in handy. But we opt to play the Chernobog here, because the opponent didn't have turn 1 Bell, which threatens singing Storm Rage. So, you know, the Broom and the Chernobog into that isn't really the greatest. The Diablo would be the preferred choice. And this is a matchup where the Cuscos can get good value, right? Eating those songs, but also using it with Crab to trade out and get draw. Speaking of Crab, we draw one there. And this is why you play these crabs in the deck. And this is where also these evasive, like the Tinkerbell and the Minnie Mouse, can really put in some work. So we're going to use Crab here to boost up the Broom. Don't banish the Broom. And then challenge the Anna to take it out, right? With the 4 strength going over the 4 willpower there. Quest with the Diablo, and we have equal lore. The opponent is ahead on ink, obviously, because they went first. And this Scrooge here is actually quite threatening. They're going to quest with the Bell instead of trying to take out one of my threats, which is interesting here. So I'm going to opt to sing Friends with the Crab, which again, I could say is probably a misplay. There's no, like, putting the Crab into an exerted state there, right, making it vulnerable so the Bell can trade it out and I don't get the boost, means that I don't really have an answer for this Scrooge for a couple of turns, right? Because I need to either draw into Maui or Dragonfire. I'm still a ways away from Be Prepared, and this opponent, obviously, is playing Pete, so the Dragonfire isn't really the most reliable form of removal. Again, another reason why we would only run something like 2 Dragonfires. So I opt for the location because I'm like, well, it has 8 willpower. Let's see if the CPU, or if it was an opponent, would want to throw both of their characters into the location. Nope, they're going to double down on the questing, right? And the setting was changed to aggro for Ink Table's AI, and they play a McDuck Manor. So this is a bit of a dicey situation now, right? Because I don't have enough strength on board to deal with the location and the characters. So I have to make a choice here, and I think the choice is taking out the Scrooge, because I can actually deal with that. So that takes 2 lore off the board, and then I can try to race, because I have the better developed board here. Yes, they have the better well, actually, no, they don't have the better location. 9 willpower to 7, but the Queen's Castle also gains 2. But I can develop my characters faster than they can at this point. And if they have songs, it's actually like not good for them, because if they song away these 1-drops, sure, you're going to waste tempo, waste ink, waste characters singing those songs instead of gaining lore in the process. So I think for a while here, and I'm going to use Crab to crash into the Scrooge, give the boost probably to Diablo, and then have Diablo take out the Scrooge. That takes 2 lore off the board, and now I can try to race the opponent. And like I mentioned, these evasive cards like Genie, Minnie Mouse, Tinkerbell put in a lot of work in this matchup here. So I'm going to opt to play the Genie, and this represents 4 lore a turn now, so I'm going to be a little bit ahead of the opponent in terms of, well, obviously in card advantage, but in lore gain, they're going to have to obviously develop some more threats. The second location comes down, and I'm like, okay, that's definitely a threat. They quest, go to 9, and I will draw 2 here off of Genie and the Queen's Castle. So again, I got all the cards in my hand, and now I actually have some firepower in these goats that I can throw down. I'm going to quest with Genie. I'm going to ink a Maleficent, play down a goat, gain a lore, and play down a Diablo and a Chernobog here. So I'm just going to opt to try to outrace these double manners. They're going to go to 13 and then play Fortisphere, draw a card, play Anna, quest with Bell, go to 14, and they're threatening lethal next turn, and I can't win the game next turn either, right? So I do have to make a decision now on what to clear from the opponent's board. We draw into Brawl. That's the perfect answer there, because the Brawl will allow me to take out the Anna, preventing the 2 lore. So I quest to 16 after gaining 2, going to 14. At the start of the turn, do the Queen's Castle. Quest with Chernobog. Oh, actually, I do have lethal. What am I saying? Because I can quest with Goat or Crash Goat, and then quest with the Diablo, and then play the last goat in my hand, or just be prepared to board and win the game this turn anyway. So I didn't even need to clear anything. So yeah, the deck, you know, it's pretty interesting. It's a very interesting concept, I think, and something that I would like to test out more in real matches. If you made it this far in the video, thank you again for watching, though. Quantum is out.